Gosh, you guys are great the way you get quiet when I walk up here. Thank you. Good afternoon. I am Melanie White, President of the Women's Club. Welcome members in the auditorium and welcome to members that are viewing online. Following today's program, please join us in the Halsey Hall to meet our speaker, Dr. Ely. Please silence your cell phones. We had no cell phones go off last week. Brand new year, we can do this. Let's do it again. There are so many wonderful opportunities coming up to connect with the Women's Club. We have a brown bag luncheon and book discussion led by the author Lynn D. Walker on February 25th from noon to 1:30. The registration deadline is February 20th. We have a dinner and book discussion about Ina Garten. This is on March 25th at 5:30 p.m. and the registration deadline is March 20th. A day trip to the Ann Spencer House and Garden Museum and Poplar Forest will take place on April 2nd. The registration deadline is March 2nd. You can sign up for any of these special events on the Programs tab in your members portal of twcrichmond.org or visit the Women's Club table at the reception for assistance in registering for any of our upcoming events. We have so many new members to welcome. In December, Alice Meadows, Barbara Wigton, Emily Janto, Joanne Mealy, Karen Hoffenheimer, Melinda Both, Yolanda Ashford joined us. In January, Carolyn Homan, Cherry Jones, Christine Glick, Debbie Kurtz, Ellen Field, Erin Bishop, Holly Hall, Ingrid Black, Julie Watson, and Julie Scott. Welcome. Welcome, new members. If you're a new member, please attend all the Women's Club programs that you can so that we get to know you, sign up for the special events so that you can get the very most out of your membership. A big thank you to the endorsers for these new members. Katie Gooch, Tony Delarata, Barbara Brancoli, Prathy Wilkerson, Linda Carlson, Kim Ruscio, Jane Shackelford, Brenda Evans McDowell, Ann Manson, Lori Clark, Bev Plethgrath, and Catherine Scott. Thank you so much for bringing these new members. We have a special thank you to the Women's Club Board for providing our refreshments today. Thank you to Ann Burke for serving as chair of the day. Ann will now introduce our speaker, Dr. Melvin Ely.
Thank you, Melanie. I am delighted to introduce Dr. Melvin Patrick Ely, our speaker today. He will talk about Black-white relationships in Antebellum, Virginia, a fascinating look. He's singularly well qualified to talk to us on this topic because it has been a focus of his academic career and also his work as an author. Dr. Ely is the Keenan Professor of History at William & Mary. He researches and teaches the history of Black Americans and the South, as well as the history of World War II and the Holocaust. Before coming to William & Mary, Dr. Ely taught at Yale University, where he received both the prize for teaching excellence and the prize for outstanding publication and research. Quite a feat, I think. He has served as Fulbright Scott Professor of American Studies at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem and has taught at Leiden University in the Netherlands. Dr. Ely is the author of Israel on the Appomattox, a Southern experiment in Black freedom from the 1790s through the Civil War, winner of the Bancroft Prize, the Library of Virginia Literary Award for Nonfiction, and other prizes. He also wrote The Adventures of Amos and Andy, a social history of an American phenomenon. And he's the co-author of the recently published book, Unbound, Free Black Virginians, 1619 to 1865. As you came in, you may have noticed there's an exhibit by that same name that he helped with here at the museum today. Dr. Ely is a native of Richmond, where he lives with his family. And so I ask you, let's give a warm welcome to our speaker of the day, Dr. Ely.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to see all of you. I want to issue my warm thanks to the Women's Club. This is my second time here, the first time being 5 years ago. It's a pleasure to be back, pleasure to be at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. Now, I'll start by promising not to repeat the talk that I gave 5 years ago. Although it might not matter, because I remember giving a talk to a Sunday school class at my church once years ago on slavery in Virginia, I suppose it was. And then about 4 or 5 months later, the program chairwoman for that class asked me to come back and talk about slavery in Virginia. And I said, but Louise, I just talked about that 4 or 5 months ago. And she said something that I've profited from ever since. She said, Melvin, do you think anybody remembers what you said 4 or 5 months ago? So I could probably give a duplicate talk today and nobody would be the wiser, but I'm not gonna do that. Thanks. Yeah. I love my tech staff. I bring them wherever I go. Help us without them. All right. I want to talk to you. Actually, this is not exactly a book talk today, but I do have a book coming out on the subject about which I'm going to be speaking, and the book is coming out April 14th. And this is it. It's called A Terrible Intimacy, Interracial Life in the Slaveholding South. Now, the South that this title or this subtitle refers to actually is one county in Virginia, Prince Edward County, which is what I've concentrated on in my research for years. More about that later. But now I want to share with you the text of a medical bill that I found in my research a number of years back, and I've copied a couple of key phrases from it. It's a bill for $10 from 1818, and I should say $10 is a lot of money then, that a skilled craftsman in 1818 in that part of Virginia might make $50 or $60 a year. So $10 is big money. And on this bill are written the following two attestations by two different men. One, Joseph Lewis writes, I certify that I have suffered my Negro man Matt to administer medicine to such persons as thought proper to employ him. So again, it's medical services. Turns out that the services were administered by an enslaved black man. And then another fellow named William Armstead writes, I know to my certain knowledge that Matt did attend on Ben Short in his last illness. Ben Short, by the way, was a free black man who, and also a landowner in Prince Edward County. So he was not a wealthy person, but clearly he had money to pay for medical care. And this indeed turned out to be his last illness. Now, the bill that I'm talking about was just a slip of paper, about like this, about this big. Every word that you see here and a few more words were scrawled onto this slip of paper. And yet from this little slip of paper, we learned so much. First of all, we learned that the medical skills of this enslaved black man were taken seriously by his owner, or the man who claimed ownership of him. The term used is medical services. We learned that Matt was operating on his own because we are told that he was suffered to administer medicine. And of course, suffered back then meant permitted. His owner permitted him to ply his trade as a doctor. He didn't send him out to do it, he permitted him to do it. Now, what does that mean? That means that Matt, the doctor, is mobile. And we really understand that when we do what I, in fact, did, which is do a little geographic detective work and discovered that Ben Short, the patient, lived 7 miles from Matt, the black doctor. So what's happening here is that Matt is allowed on his own time to circulate around and to sell his medical services to whoever wants to buy them. What we don't know from this document, and I don't know to this day, is whether any of his patients were white. That would be fascinating, wouldn't it, if we found that to be the case. What I do know is that I've found other documentation of other black doctors, and the term doctor is used. This is documentation generated by white people, so there's a certain amount of seriousness attached to the medical skills of these folks. We don't know from this document, and how much can we ask of a document this size? We don't know what the type of illness that was that Ben Short had. We don't know the type of medicine that was administered. Was it typical of the medicines that doctors of that time used? Were there plant substances used that the use of which had been handed down from Africa? We don't know. I would love to know that. More about this in a minute, but first let me tell you what part of the world that it is that we're talking about. Ann mentioned that I'd written a previous book, Israel and the Appomattox. This is about black people who were free in the period of slavery, and 1 in 10 black Virginians in the 1850s was free. And 1 in 20 free people in the state of Virginia was black. So you've got a pretty substantial free population. And that's who this book is about in Prince Edward County, which is a place, if you know, it looks like this. I mean, this is the part of it does. This is the Appomattox River. These are the cargo boats of the type that were used on the Appomattox River back in the time I'm talking about. And I say that I have a long relationship. I calculated this morning, 35 years I've been working in Prince Edward County, and this is part of the black community there. About 20 years ago, we got a historical marker put up for Israel Hill, which was a community of liberated free black people founded in 1810. And these are some of the descendants. So they and I go way back, and I'm still going. This is where Prince Edward County is, by the way, on the map of Virginia, the blue star being Richmond, and the red is Prince Edward. It's about an hour and a quarter drive from here. And we need to understand what kind of society it is that we're talking about. There is an image out there of the pre-Civil War South as being a place of plantations, and even cotton plantations. Well, a plantation is usually defined as a place on which there were 20 or more enslaved people working. Arbitrary definition, but it works. When the Civil War broke out, half of the enslaved people in the American South lived not on plantations. They lived on smaller holdings, and perhaps nowhere more so than in Virginia. You look in central Virginia, Southside Virginia, you get some big plantations, yes. But this house that you see here, this would have been one of the finer houses of Prince Edward County. And it's a nice house. I mean, I wouldn't mind living in a house like this, but it's not Monticello, it's not Mount Vernon. The dominant group in this county among white people, as far as I can tell, were the sort of middling slaveholders, the ones who owned maybe 8, 10, a dozen, 15, maybe up to 20 people. There were some bigger planters that had some influence, but it was these middling guys that really ran things for the most part. Now, let's get back to the slip of paper. I want to talk some more about that. Where did I get it? Well, like every county in Virginia, Prince Edward had a courthouse, and this is a poor picture, but the best one we have, of the courthouse in the 1830s, 40s, 50s. This was a building of 24,000 square feet. Most of us live in houses that are bigger than that. But this is where the county court met, and the county court tried criminal cases and civil cases, but it also was the governing body of the county. And so it generated all kinds of documents, and it collected all kinds of documents. People submitted all kinds of documents that today look like this. Each case or each item would be folded over into sixths and then bound into packets like this. You can see on the left, the cloth binding is pink, red, and I'm told that the term red tape comes from this. I don't know if it's true, but it sounds good. Sounds reasonable. And in these papers, you find all kinds of things, even a floor plan of the very courthouse we were just talking about. So when I try to envision the trials taking place, and my new book centers around 5 criminal trials, I have a picture in my mind that I derive from this plan. When you unfold those packets, you get individual documents that look something like this. This one looks worse than a lot of them do. This one's kind of frayed around the edges. But there are literally millions upon millions of sheets of paper like this in the Library of Virginia downtown. And that brings me back to the medical bill. What's the medical bill even doing in there? It's there because Ben Short, the patient, died. We saw it was his final illness. He died before he paid the bill. And so the owner of the enslaved doctor, the doctor himself couldn't petition for the money, couldn't sue for it because a slave couldn't do that. But the master goes and demands payment. He goes to court and he submits not quite an affidavit. He submits this. Why does that make this a good piece of evidence? It's because Matt's owner is not describing the system of slavery. He's not making a political point about slavery or anything else. He's not trying to prove slavery is good or intimate that slavery is bad. He's not evaluating even the legitimacy of enslaved doctors, except that he does grant some legitimacy, right? Because he's calling Matt's work medical services. This guy was owed $10, and he wanted to be paid. And to me, this is gold. This is the gold standard in terms of primary evidence. The evidence that somebody generates not to make a point. All of the points that I derived from it had nothing to do with the reason that this paper was filed. This tells me so much more than an editorial in a newspaper defending slavery or an abolitionist tract decrying slavery. Those are good, those are important, but they're trying to make a point. This tells me things I want to know, and I get it from somebody who isn't talking to me. He never knew I was going to see this. He thought, this is a one-shot deal. I want my $10 over with. So along come I, 160 years later, and I read all kinds of things here. Let's talk about medical practice by enslaved blacks just a little bit more, because you find lots of documentation of this. And white people believed in the effectiveness of some of these remedies, and conversely, they also worried that enslaved people were going to poison them, that they knew how to use plants in ways that white people didn't know. I found one case in which a county justice took quite seriously the allegation that one enslaved person had poisoned another enslaved person using, and I quote, clipped hair of beard on a piece of bacon. Now, that tells me something about African American chemistry, but it also tells me about the white mentality. That the justice who wrote that was taking that dead seriously. He's presenting a criminal charge based on his acceptance of the belief that you can poison somebody with clipped hair or beard on a piece of bacon. A few more examples of what you can learn from these kinds of documents. Selling liquor to enslaved people without their master's permission was against the law in Virginia. But it happened all the time. How do I know? Because every now and again, some white person who thought it was a bad idea to do that would squeal on some other white person who had done it. And so you see the charges filed in the county court and the fines levied. But the people who sold liquor, the storekeepers in Prince Edward County and a lot of other places, to them the occasional fine was just the normal cost of doing business. There's one fellow who became county sheriff in the 1850s, and I find that in the 4 years before he became county sheriff, he was fined at least 3 times for selling liquor to enslaved people without their master's permission. And then he gets elected county sheriff. So that tells you not that he's a slippery customer, because he got caught every now and again. It tells you that there were 2 schools of thought. I'll simplify a little bit. 2 schools of thought among white people regarding the control of the enslaved. Everybody agreed. Almost all white people in this society supported slavery. They agreed you needed to have controls. But many thought that there was no harm if enslaved people, on their own time, when they'd finished their day's work, if they still had the energy, for them to make shoes or make horse collars or make liquor or grow crops and sell them. Sell them to whom? White people. Lots and lots of white customers of enslaved producers. On the other hand, there are the white people who think this is a terrible idea and they keep legislating against it. And there are historians who read those laws and they say, oh, enslaved people weren't allowed to have money or work on their own time. Plenty of them had a few coins in their pocket. Why were they allowed to do it? In the first place, why should the master care? In the second place, a lot of white people were their customers. In the third place, the morale in the slave quarter was going to be less bad if you gave people just a little bit of leeway to do something to improve their lives. Every slave owner knew those he enslaved or she enslaved. All right, if you get into the Cotton Kingdom and you go down to Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, and you get a plantation with 500 people there, did the owner know 500 people individually? I doubt it. But in this part of the world, where you have holdings of 5, 10, 15, they knew each other. They saw each other every day. Now, that doesn't mean that they were buddies, and it sure doesn't mean that they were equal, but they knew each other. They knew each other's foibles. They knew each other's strengths. They knew each other. They knew each other's secrets. They knew each other's enslaved people. One man filed a deposition where he said that he knew all of the Negroes, I'm quoting the language, all of the Negroes belonging to the estate of a neighbor. And he proceeded to name which 10 of them by name had been taken away by one member of the family who had moved away. They knew each other well, and that's why the title of my new book is A Terrible Intimacy. We'll talk more about the terrible part in a few minutes, but by intimacy, all I mean, no, most of what I mean is they knew each other. They knew each other. They knew the individuality of each other. White knew black, black knew white. They knew each other's quirks. They knew each other's strengths. They knew each other's histories. Sometimes, and I can hear the question almost forming in some people's minds, does this mean there was empathy there? Does this mean there was affection there? And there are people who want to depict, or at least in the past wanted to depict, the Old South as a place where everybody was one big family, one big happy-ish family. And that's not the picture that I'm drawing, and yet there is, at times, empathy, or at least sympathy. Let's take the sympathy part for a minute. I found a case of an enslaved black girl named Patsy in winter of 1860-61, and she left her owner at least twice during that winter. She made no effort to stay out of sight. She spent time, extended time, in 2 or 3 white households, and she expressed her desire to remain in one of them. She wanted to stay with them instead of go back to her master. One white man with whom she stayed testified later that he'd heard that this girl's mistress had been, quoting, a little hard on her, and he treated her frostbitten foot, quoting again, by steaming, bathing, and application of roast turnip and fish brine. Now, that's a kind of intimacy. It's not equal to intimacy. He takes this girl in, and he tries to cure her frostbite when she arrives at his place. And most interesting to me is none of this young lady's white hosts ever sent her back to the person who claimed ownership. Now, eventually, the owner sent somebody for her, and at that point, they let her go. So that is sympathy. But in the end, it didn't save this girl from having to go back to a situation that obviously she found pretty much unlivable. There are many other qualifiers here to this idea of sympathy. I have an instance where one white man wrote in his will that he, I'm quoting, did not think it proper to separate a black man from his neighborhood and connections by selling this man to an interstate slave trader, somebody who'd take him away from his family down to Alabama or somewhere. But the way this white man assuaged his own conscience was to sell this enslaved fellow instead to his own son. Well, I'm sure that was better than being sold literally down the river, but clearly the idea that ownership of another human being is legitimate never was questioned by this person. I mean, there were people who wanted to be humane, but they did not question the right to own another person and the right to, in some ways, many ways, govern their lives. You find cases where an enslaved person changes hands in payment of a loan, or somebody puts up a mother and child as collateral for a loan. Found a man of some means in Prince Edward County who was a sort of a drunkard and wastrel who periodically would go up to Richmond to attend the circus or to get drunk or to play poker or whatever. And over time, he drank and gambled away almost all of the enslaved people he owned. And you know, it would have happened one by one by one, and they're scattered to the four winds. I mean, these people are being used to pay off gambling debts. A will that I found shows how the threat of sale was used to enforce discipline. As this man writes, he directs to sell my Negro man Dick the wheelwright, and also any others of my Negroes that may be ungovernable or misbehave. Well, while this guy was still alive, I have no doubt that one of the ways he maintained discipline was to threaten what in his will he then proceeded to do, which was to sell individuals not only to some place that might be even worse, but away from their family and connections. Here I want to talk about judicial punishments because my book, A Terrible Intimacy, as I said, it's based on about half a dozen criminal cases. And here's a record from one of them. I don't want to deal in spoilers here, but I'll just say this is a case of an enslaved man named Tom who killed a white man, killed his white overseer. Why he killed him, how he killed him, what was his reason, I'm not going to get into now. But the fact is that he killed him, not contested. Convicted, condemned to death. Well, what do we learn here? First of all, an enslaved man kills a white man, and he gets a trial. We're used to reading about people being lynched for way less than that. And that happened later in the history of the South. But you don't get many lynchings in the slaveholding South. Why? Because, in part, people are property. And if you lynch an enslaved person, you're destroying, under the system of the time, the property of the person who claims ownership. So that's one reason. Humanity was part of it too, I assume, to some degree or other. So Tom wasn't lynched. He got a trial. Of course, he was convicted and condemned to death, even though there was evidence that he acted in self-defense. What I'm showing you here, though, is my way of dramatizing something that's very little known except by historians, and that is, in Virginia at least, if an enslaved person after about 1801 was condemned to death, that case automatically went to the governor to decide whether to go ahead and hang the person or to commute the sentence to transportation. And transportation meant that the person would be sold to a slave trader who would then take them to another country that had slavery, Brazil, for example, and sell them down there. And of all the people who were condemned, all the enslaved people condemned in Virginia from 1790 to the Civil War, 2/3 of them had their sentences commuted to transportation. And here, too, we have an economic motive. The state, by law, had to compensate a slave owner if his or her enslaved person was executed or transported. So Joe Smith loses a slave because that person is convicted of a crime. The state has to pay him back. But if the state, instead of hanging that person, sells him, the state gets his money back that way. So there's an economic motive to commute these sentences. I don't mean to sound too cynical here, but I mean to sound a little cynical, at least. And that's what happened here, because if you look closely at this document, what it says, Commonwealth versus Tom, and then there's a finger pointing, and what it says there is to be executed 6 January next. This is a petition to the governor, and the governor's secretary is calling his attention. He said, you got about 3 weeks to deal with this. And then down at the bottom is the notation of what the governor did. It says reprieved for transportation. So this fellow Tom was not, in fact, executed. Where he ended up, we don't know, and we never will know. Now, I said that 2 out of 3 condemned to death were, in fact, transported, and they remained alive. But that leaves the other third. And there were, in fact, 600 enslaved black individuals, approximately, between 1800 and 1860 who were executed. And here's the evidence of one of them. This is another slip of paper like this. And in fact, it was folded over this is what it looked like in the papers. In this big box of thousands of papers, there's this. But I'm obsessive. I see this, I want to know what this is, okay? And so I open it up, and here's what it says. I think there are 15 words on here. It says 1826, Prince Edward County, in account with Reuben Perry, who was a carpenter, I happen to know. It says July 28th, to one gallows furnished at $10. And this was a gallows that was used to hang another black guy who had killed a white woman. So you could end up swinging from a noose for sure, and here's the proof of that. Okay, I said that my book, my new book, is based on a series of cases. I'm going to tell you quickly about a couple of them. One is about a wedding. There was a Presbyterian minister, a pretty well-known one, a guy named Benjamin H. Rice at Hampton-Sydney College, who had a few slaves, and he hired the enslaved woman of somebody else to, I think, be a house servant. He didn't own her, but he hired her. She decided she was going to get married. Benjamin Rice's two grown daughters decided they wanted to have a nice wedding for her. So the Rices indeed planned an elaborate wedding and reception. They sent out written invitations to whomever the enslaved woman asked them to. And of course, these are other enslaved black people that are getting these invitations. They come for the party. I think Dr. Rice probably conducted the ceremony. He's there watching it all. The party continues. It's 11 o'clock at night. No sign of stopping. And by the way, that's against the law also. It was against the law for black people to gather at night, free or slave, at all, anywhere except on the holding of whoever owned them. So it's already a violation of the law. So 11 o'clock rolls around, and the slave patrol rides in. The slave patrol is a group of 3 to 5 white guys whose job it is to ride around and look for enslaved people where they're not supposed to be or doing something they're not supposed to do. Now, most nights there was no patrol out. This night there was a patrol. They show up and they ask for passes, written passes. Now, that's already in contravention of the law, because even if you had a pass, you're not allowed to be there at night. But the ones who had a pass, the patrol sends them home. The ones who don't have a pass, the patrol whips them, and sends them home. And here this isn't from that very instance, but this is what a patrol return looked like. These guys got paid for being on patrol. Not a lot, but they got paid. And when they were done, they turned their hours in. This is the hour sheet for 3 patrollers here. And the numbers, by the way, are in shillings and pence. They didn't use shillings and pence then, but they did their accounts in shillings and pence, often. Now, you will ask me why in the Q&A. Don't bother, because I don't know. But I learned how to translate that into dollars eventually, because I had to. One other instance quickly. I'll just tell you this photograph relates to a case where a white man shot and stabbed an enslaved man. And he was tried for that, attempted murder. And what happened then, you would need to read the book in order to find that out, because I'm not going to get to that. But what I will say is that this case turned in part on a love affair between a slave owner, male, and somebody else's female slave. Why do I say love? How do I know it wasn't just exploitation? Because they were together long enough to have 2 children before it got broken up. And one of the children is the man you see in this picture, who grew up to become one of the most noted black clergymen of the late 19th century. a guy named William Colley Jr., and here he is with his wife. The last case I'm going to give you has to do with one of the most fascinating characters I came to know, and that's a woman named Betsy Lyle. Betsy Lyle I encountered in a bastardy case. When's the last time you used the word bastardy? What that means is, of course, is that if there was a child born out of wedlock and it wasn't clear who was going to support the child, the county authorities stepped in to make sure somebody supported them. So this Betsy Lyle was living in the county poorhouse, and she had a daughter. And the overseers of the poor, as they were called, want to know who the father is so they can dun him for the $15 a year that it's going to take to raise this child. And she names a man named Fraser Scott, who was one guy who had more than 20 enslaved people in Prince Edward County. This guy is a planter. He's got 21, 22, 23 enslaved people. She names him, and he doesn't deny it, but what he does is he files a paper in which he says, Betsy Lyle is a Negro, or a mulatto is the term he used. Sorry about this terminology, I'm just quoting. He says, she's a mulatto. Her father was an enslaved guy, and her mother a white woman. And I'll prove that she's not white, and he brings her before the body that's going to decide, and she looks kind of brown. And they bring a couple of witnesses in, and one of the witnesses says, fascinating thing, I think. He says, Betsy's father was the blackest man I've ever seen in my life, but she was raised by her mother's family, and it said that she sits with them in church. So this Betsy, although I think she was like olive complected at least, or brown, she grows up in this white family. In the community, I'm sure gossip, I mean, clear that the community gossiped, but that was allowed. As long as nobody made a big stink about it, she can sit with them in church. But not after the bastardy thing comes up, because at that point, the father of the child has it in his interest not to pay the $15. And the way he does it, he says, she's a mulatto. So what? Because a person with any known black ancestry was not allowed to testify against a white person in any matter. So he says, yeah, I fathered the child, but the mother's testimony is unacceptable. End of story. And in fact, he sued the overseers of the poor for his cost in defending himself, and they were required to pay him. All right. Then I find another document in which Betsy's mother is committed to a mental institution previously. And that's how I understood how Betsy's in the poorhouse, because her mother was taken away from her. Then I find another case. It's a case where a enslaved man is accused of raping a white woman. And I won't tell you the outcome of this, but I'll just promise you, if you ever read the book, you're going to be, let us say, interested in the outcome, because it's not the outcome that you get in To Kill a Mockingbird. I'll just leave it at that. It turns out that the plantation owner who's involved in that whole rape case, he's the guy that got Betsy Lyle pregnant. And it turns out she is still living with him. She lived with him until the day he died. They ended up with 7 children. And eventually, as he was dying, he left 30 acres. He had 30 acres laid out for Betsy Lyle and the children to have a farm of their own. Now, does this make this guy a hero? Do I want to emulate this guy? No, but what it tells me is that there's a relationship there that has all kinds of ramifications to it that I want to know as much about as I possibly can. All right, what do we make of all of this? Oh, by the way, this is Betsy Lyle's daughter. And this branch of the family ends up passing as white. And today, they're white. All right. What do we make of all of this? Well, first of all, before we get too excited about all the human interactions that can exist here, there's also brutality of the most unbelievable kind. I mean, you think you've read it all, and then you read about an enslaved man whose master beats him with tobacco sticks. That's what these are. These are sticks that are about this high, about an inch in diameter, and he breaks tobacco sticks over this guy's head and gouges his eyes with them. And he pulls teeth with pliers out of the guy's mouth. He puts him in shackles like this and puts him out to harvest. And when the man can't keep up with the harvest because of the shackles, the master tortures him some more. And I'm not going to tell the rest of the story, but I'll just tell you that the enslaved fellow, William, at the time was harvesting oats with a tool that looks like this. It's called a cradle. It's a scythe with some wooden fingers on it to catch the grain, right, as it gets cut down, and to bunch it into neat sheaves. I'll only tell you that when this white guy administers still more torture to William has one of these in his hand. I'll leave it at that. So what do we make of all of this? What's the message of the book? What I'm saying is, in households of 5, 10, 15, 20 people, the exploiters and the exploited knew each other well. They shared sometimes religious worship, folk ways, complex domestic dynamics, sometimes even some kind of love, sometimes. Slaves, slave owners, overseers and poor whites drank together, had sex together, played together, whipped the tar out of each other, killed each other. Whippings happened often. Families were split up. And whatever relationships there might be, in 1861, almost every man in Prince Edward County was at least willing, if not eager, to fight to preserve a system in which human beings owned other human beings. And to me, this is the real tragedy, that people did know each other. They did recognize the humanity of each other, and in spite of that, you could have a system that's based on the ownership of human being by human being that entailed, along with the closeness, all of the brutality that I've talked about today. And that's why I chose this picture for the cover of my book. I don't know who these people are. I don't know what their relationship is. But I don't know about you. I look at this picture and what I see is ambiguity. Exhibit A, the black woman. Who is she? What is her relationship to these white people? And what is she thinking? That, to me, is one of the most expressive human faces that I have seen in any 19th century photograph, except I don't know how to read it. Is she wistful? Is she miserable? Is she content? I don't know. I don't know what the white people are thinking either. But I thought, can I use this picture on my book, not knowing anything about it other than what I see in front of me? And I just said, yeah, use it exactly for that reason. That it's vivid and I don't know exactly what's going on. And I'm writing about a society in which a lot of stuff was crystal clear. And a fair amount of the time, people didn't quite know what to make of what was going on. and what the other person was thinking. I guess most societies are like that. And maybe part of what I'm saying is that the antebellum South, antebellum Virginia, as abnormal as it was by our standards, in some ways was normal. And the way in which it was normal is it consisted of human beings who knew each other and had all kinds of relationships. It's one that, God forbid, we would ever go back to. And it's not one I romanticize, but it's one that I think is very, very interesting. I'm going to stop there, and I'll put this up here. We don't have books here today because the book's not coming out till April 14th, but if you're interested, this QR code will get you to the book, and I'm told that the Women's Club is going to publish it also. But I'm not here to sell books. I'm here to talk about serious things. So if anybody has a question or a thought, I'd love to hear them. Yes?
I was wondering about Matt and the medical services. Would that $10 have been kept by Matt's owner, or would it be Matt's?
It would be up to the owner what happened to it. Now, it's inconceivable to me that the owner didn't pocket part of it, because that's what. When an enslaved person was hired out, like on an annual basis, the owner got all of it. In these sort of cases that are technically in defiance of the law, it was between the owner and Matt. I would be almost sure that Matt got part of it, and that the master got part of it, and that's one of the reasons he's going after the money, that he's going to get part of it. Maybe he's a great altruist and he wants Matt to have $10, but I wouldn't hold my breath on that. Yes. Yeah, the green shirt.
I'm interested about your focus on Prince Edward County, because that was ground zero when the schools were closed.
Yeah.
In following the Brown versus the Board of Education. Given that this community was fairly tight-knit in the sense that they knew each other.
Yeah.
And generationally, that probably didn't change a lot.
Right.
From the 1860s until 1954. Do you have any insights into why they were so dug in, the white community, in resisting integration?
I can tell you a few things about that. The white community, ideologically, I don't know that they were more dug in than a lot of other counties, but Prince Edward County was one of the 4 counties or jurisdictions that were covered in the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1950. That's actually 4 cases. Linda Brown was in Topeka, Kansas, of all places, but the other 3 were Clarendon County, South Carolina, Prince Edward, Virginia, and the whole state of Delaware, as I recall. D.C. was part of it too, but then severed off of there. So when the Supreme Court made that decision, and then in 55 they said that the desegregation could take place with all deliberate speed. Deliberate speed for Prince Edward County only lasted 4 or 5 years, because Prince Edward was directly affected by that ruling. For a long period after that, if you wanted to desegregate schools anywhere else in the South, you had to litigate that separately. It had to be case by case until 1966. Prince Edward directly affected, all right? So that's one reason that Prince Edward digs in. Another reason is, I think, that both the black community and the white community in Prince Edward County had exceptional leadership. Now, that sounds funny to say about segregationists, but what I mean by exceptional is very effective. I mean, the editor of the newspaper in Farmville and some other people down there were very fixated on not letting this happen. And the leadership was such that the followership followed. The black community also very dynamically led. The whole thing started in 1951 when a high school student, 16 or 17, Barbara Johns, and her friends walked out of that school, that high school, that inadequate black high school, and marched on the school board and demanded, at the time they demanded an equal black high school, not desegregation. But that morphed into a desegregation fight. And the kids brought the parents along on that. And then there was a really dynamic leader there named Reverend Francis Griffin, one of the great leaders of the civil rights movement. So you've got really dedicated, strong leadership on both sides, and that can lead to stasis, right? I don't think, and yeah, right, generationally, they still knew each other. Reverend Griffin said that he ran into one of the leaders of the white segregationists on the street once, and that the man said to him, well, hello, Reverend Griffin, how are you? He said, this is just a gentleman's agreement, a gentleman's disagreement. This is a disagreement among gentlemen. Or Griffin said the same thing. He knows this guy. They're still on speaking terms, but they won't do business with Griffin anymore. And they want to cut off the electric service to his house, stuff like that. So that's what I mean when I say you can know somebody pretty well, and it's not pleasant. Unhappy marriages are like that. You know the person well, but that doesn't mean that it's a picnic. You're having a good time. Sometimes knowing a person well is the kiss of death. But if you ask me why Prince Edward County, I can give you those reasons, but I feel as though it's an inadequate answer, and the rest of the answer, for the rest of my life, I will be in search of. There's a gentleman right in the middle.
I'm interested in how you, as a historian, how do you protect your own humanity? In the introduction, your focus areas are slavery, World War II, and the Holocaust.
Right.
How do you get close and maintain your humanistic integrity?
That's a question I ask myself a lot, and I don't have a glib answer to it. I mean, I ask myself, why have I spent my life studying what used to be called man's inhumanity to man? Why? And the only answer I can give you is this, a partial answer. And that is, I grew up in this city during the civil rights movement, and during the years in which the public schools that I attended went from being segregated by law to desegregated gradually by law. And I had the experience of coming to know black peers and coming to maybe 1% understanding of what they and their people had been through. And you look at the TV and you see it there. You see what was being done to people in the streets. And I just got angry. I'm trying to understand. I have been taught all people are created equal, and that's what the country's founded on. And I'm taught at church, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in His sight. And that's not the way the world is working, and I want to know why, damn it. I just want to know why. And I still want to know why. How do you not let it get to you? Well, it does get to you. That's all I can say. What I do ask myself is, what difference any of this make? Is what I do make a difference? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know, but I know that not doing it is not an option, and for me. And I also believe that trying to find as best I can identify the truth. Yeah, I know the truth truth depends on the point of view, and there's no real truth in all of that. I don't buy it. I mean, I'm trying to find out the real scoop, wherever it leads. And some of what I say doesn't please, I mean, none of what I say pleases the racist element. And some of what I find doesn't please what some people call the far left, I suppose. I don't know. But just looking for the truth and trying to stay not depressed. And it don't always work. Yes.
So I, in my thinking about all of the stuff, I mean, I grew up in Richmond when it was segregated and all this. So I experienced all that kind of stuff. But I think that it's the education. I think, as Maya Angelou said, well, you do better when you know better. And I think a lot of the attitudes and all of that back when I was growing up, people believe, because they were being taught that on both sides. You know what I mean?
I do.
There were, I'm sure, white people who were teaching their children that these black children are not your equal and
Right.
not as good and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But in black homes, you would have them, you can't trust any white people. And I am just glad that my mother raised me to look at, as Martin Luther King said, look at the content of your character.
Yeah.
And judge people by who they are, how they treat you, and not assume. And I often tell the story, and it was a good lesson for me. I was running for a board position in Florida. Well, it wasn't in Florida, it was an organization, and we were in Florida. And a bunch of ladies in the receiving line refused to shake my hand or, you know, talk to me. And I was like, okay, well, that's their problem. I'm not gonna worry about it. And so I just sit, you know, down and said, whatever. And in the conversation, I said something about Richmond, and one of them looked at me, Richmond? You from Richmond? And I said, yes, that's where I grew up. And they said, well, when did you move? And I said, I did move. They had me mixed up with somebody, because she said, oh, because a Yankee can't win down here. And what I found out was they were not upset because I was black. They were upset because they thought I was a Yankee.
Right. Right.
And so that lesson taught me that, you know, people have all kind of reasons why they feel, but I think mostly it's because of miseducation, misinformation, all of that.
Well, we should talk afterwards, because I want to know where you went to high school and all of that. Because because what I'm thinking, listening to your talk, is I wish that my mom and your mom had met and talked, and maybe they did. That's what I want to establish when we speak, because my mother too raised me. Now she had a lot of ignorance and blind spots, having been raised in the South the way she was, but she really believed in the gospel of Jesus Christ, and she believed that what that meant was you treat everybody the same. Everybody's the same. And that's what I was brought up on. And I do believe, getting back to the gentleman's question, what good is it? This wasn't your question, but I said in response, I don't know what good any of this does. It does do good sometimes, because my dad was raised as a segregationist. I mean, not Klansmen are mean, or he believed in being kind to people, but he just didn't know anything except segregation. That seemed like the way to go. And he changed. You know, in the 60s, by the 70s, he's voting for black candidates and eating lunch with black friends. And so I've seen people change. And I've seen enough of it to keep going, and not enough of it to feel pleased and satisfied.